right. So I believe we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shannon Q. If you can hear me in the chat, please say hello, wave to me, say we can hear you, Shannon, so that I can make sure the sound and everything is doing okay. Oh, there's a hello. Hey, we're good. So today we are going to have a great conversation. I'm really excited to have it. I have two very, very special guests with me. I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I believe we are live. And I should also mute myself because I'm incredibly unprofessional and I just got feedback from the stream coming in. So sorry. Wouldn't be a stream if I didn't do something dumb. I did 5 dumb things before we started. So only 1 dumb thing after we started. It's a good track record for me. So we're going to have a conversation today about undue influence and how to work with people who are recovering from cult indoctrination, and also how to approach and have conversations with people who you feel may currently be under undue influence. It's a conversation I'm really excited about. I don't think you're going to hear much from me because these two have wonderful conversations. I was just sitting listening to them before and watching them have conversations in the DM before they have so much insight on this. I'm really excited to hear them interact. But before we start the conversation, I'd like them to have an opportunity to introduce themselves. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Andey. Andey, tell everybody who you are and where they can find you.
Okay, hi, I'm Andy. I used to be a New Ager and was in an online New Age cult for a little while. I'm now making videos on YouTube as an atheist, agnostic atheist, but atheist nonetheless. And I make videos about destructive cults, damaging norms, and just generally bad ideas. That's kind of how I introduce my channel generally.
Andey has a great channel. I got introduced to Andey through Narvardia tagging me in one of your tweets on Twitter.
Yeah, okay.
And then I saw you on Dave's channel on DPR or DRP.
Yes.
And I was like,
cool.
oh, I'm gonna have to talk to this guy. Then I watched one of your live streams, and one of the first things that you said, or not live stream premieres, and one of the first things you said was, go advocate for yourself, learn these things yourselves. You're just hearing this from me. You know, I feel as though I have, some expertise but what I really like you to do is go advocate for yourself. And I was like, spirit animal, you're coming on my channel. You will be on the channel. So thank you for being here. I'm really excited to hear everything.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, I'm great. It's great. I'm excited that you're here. And next, somebody who is already been on this channel by way of Telltale and his channel, I would like to reintroduce you to Chris Shelton. Chris, tell everybody who you are and where they can find you.
Hey guys, I'm a YouTuber. I'm on my channel is my name, Chris Shelton, critical thinker at large. I have talked extensively about Scientology and my past experience with that because I'm was a second gen Scientologist. I've been out for 6 years now and advocating and being an activist against destructive cults in general, starting with Scientology and moving out from there. So I've done interviews with therapists, sociologists, cult recovery specialists, psychologists, and former members of Scientology and other groups to talk about, what it's all about, how people get in, what Scientology is all about specifically, how to get out of these cults, and what the language is, what the mechanisms are, and all of that. And I'm endlessly fascinated by all of it, especially the psychology of it. So coming out of that, of course, led to critical thinking. So that's why I talk about critical thinking a lot too. So I'm not like, Mr. Professional critical thinker. I just try to do the best I can.
Yeah, and you do great. We had a great conversation, so I'm enjoying having a conversation with you again. We talked about Stefan Molyneux. We never talk about anything fun, Chris.
Yeah, I know, right? That's for sure. Stefan, Jesus, that guy.
That was a nightmare. Yeah, it was awful. So I'm going to kick off the conversation, and then I'll likely just sit here attentively listening to you guys and ask questions as I have them. So here's an easy question. If you have a friend or family member who you think may be under undue influence or maybe a member of a cult and you feel them pulling away or changing, what are some of the signs that may be happening and how should you approach them?
Do you want to start, Chris?
Sure. Okay, so pulling away a little bit. So you're finding the person already being a little distant. Okay, well, the signs are basically what you asked in your question, right?
Mm-hmm. So they're starting to pull away?
Yeah, changes. And perhaps also an enthusiasm for a particular group or individual that's newly in their life.
Okay.
Because if we're talking about, how destructive cults go about recruiting people, it's generally in a fairly enthusiastic way. The people are very excited about it because it's changing or giving them some solution to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll tend to see that as well. Although it's not always that way. I'm just kind of throwing that out there because that's what's happening in the person's life. And it's rare that they try to keep that thing a secret. But sometimes they're told, don't tell your family or don't tell your friends. They won't understand. So that does happen. And you might have to then draw it out of them. And the single best advice I can give for every single moment you're in touch with somebody who is getting into, is in, or is coming out of a destructive cult is always do your best to be as kind and compassionate and understanding as you can be. Because hostility and antagonism and anger and resentment are only going to make the person double down on something besides you and want you away from them. Whereas if you are open, compassionate, understanding, not falsely agreeing with any of their nonsense, I'm just saying being open and honest with them and willing to listen to them more than talk at them, that's about the best general advice I could give for somebody in that position.
What do you think, Andey? Do you have anything that you can weigh in on?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that obviously cults in general you'll notice is that they have specific language, buzzwords, idiosyncrasies that they play into. So you might notice in terms of what you might see when someone's joining a group like that, the language. They might start to use words in different ways or new words that they've never used before. That could be like, okay, right, something's going on here. If you're looking out for signs that they're maybe involved with something new. But I would just second everything that Chris said there. And I think we've all made mistakes with that one as well. I've got Jehovah's Witnesses in the family. And I have the amount of conversations I've had with these family members about their religion just growing up, because they've been they've been in the group my whole life. So the amount of arguments, and it just doesn't go anywhere. So I think once you reveal yourself as someone who's like, I think you're in a cult, then immediately they're like, no conversation. Not
exactly. That's right. Yeah. Even the word cult, right? You don't want to go there. They're not going to understand, right? And you're not going to get them there in one conversation. Oh, that's the other thing. It's not just a one-time deal. You don't just sit them down and think you're going to talk sense to them, air quotes.
Interventions aren't going to work in this scenario.
Yeah, and they're going to have some moment. I mean, that could happen, especially if they're really newly into it. But generally speaking, it's going to be multiple levels of conversation. So that's another reason why you always want to leave things open. It's not about you, it's about them. And so you have to deal with them at where they're at, not where you're at, and this is so, so important. And yes, I have made this mistake 20,000 times wrong, which is why you see me get so earnest about this, is because I've screwed it up myself so many times, even knowing, all this stuff that we know. So
is that because having conversations with somebody who is under that sort of influence could potentially be frustrating because either you're not recognizing them or they're saying stuff that you just can't quite understand? Like, how are you not seeing that this is ridiculous? Like, why aren't you listening to me? Might that play into what strategies do you utilize personally, where both of you have been in and out of cult type situations, to try to stifle that intuition, to be like, what is wrong with you? Like, try to shake it out of them. Like, what strategies would you use in a frustrating conversation?
I just think trying to understand where they're coming from is like the first thing for me. Like the place I've had this most, and I think this is not a place to try and do this, but it is in my YouTube comment sections. And you just see so many people Can you hear me all right? Am I lagging or anything?
You're lagging a little bit, but I can hear you okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the YouTube comment section is not the place to try and make anyone see sense. It's just not a place where sense is very often.
What?
But who
Really?
knew?
Notice that.
Yeah. But yeah, I do see a lot of people coming like that. I had this one comment yesterday of someone who'd been commenting for maybe a week, best part of a week now, and they're just nasty comments. And then yesterday, it was a really strange one. It was long, and it was half angry and like trying to upset me, and the other half of it was apologizing for trying to upset me. And it was the strangest thing. And it was it was almost like we're talking about co-identity a little bit before, and that's something that we should definitely talk about here, because you are dealing with two kinds of people. You are dealing with two people, rather. The person before, and then the person who's gone through this indoctrination. Go on, Chris.
Exactly. I'm sorry. I'm totally trying to cut you off because I want to make a point before I forget about the communication part. Because I'll forget, and then it's kind of, and I think it feeds into what you were saying about how you speak with people, right? Which is asking a lot of questions and listening to the answers. Like street epistemology is really good for learning how to talk to or interact with people who have deep beliefs. And I was going to say also, just be really chill. Really, you got to put your calm hat on. You know what I mean? You go into these conversations all worked up. The other you're already affecting the other person's biology and riling them up just with that kind of energy. So you want to really dial it down. You don't have to be like a soft-spoken priest or something. I mean, if you care about the person, care about them. But I'm just saying that the best way to, the second you get their defenses up, it's over. So
that must be a hard line to walk between potentially enabling continued indoctrination and potentially alienating a person because you're pushing them away. Like that must be an incredibly difficult line to walk, because if they're also probably being reinforced through the group dynamic that they're now entrenched within, that because they've had this enlightenment or because they've come to these sorts of revelations, that other people are going to push against them or are going to deny them. So you'd also have to be cognizant that you're not reinforcing that bias that's been planted in them by that group identity. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I love conversations, but it would be such a nuanced interaction to traverse even over time.
That's right. Well, this is feeding right into Andy's point there that I cut him off on. So Andy, you should pick that back up.
Yeah, please do.
What was it? I just got totally absorbed in what Shannon was saying. What was my point?
about the different personalities.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
just before I jump onto that again, I want to say, with I think you mentioned, I don't know if you said it before we went live or after, Chris, but compassion, like having that real understanding for the fact that this is someone who has been through something that you may not actually, especially if you've not been in a cult yourself, you may not fully ever understand what's happened to them unless you've done like all the research and you've studied. So trying to understand where they're at, trying to understand how they're feeling past what they're saying, because what they're saying is, and this is where it feeds into the core identity thing, is probably something that they've heard someone else in the group say and they've learned it and now they're repeating it. It will sound like it's a script. Stephen Hassan talks about this a lot in his book, which I highly recommend, The Combating Cult Mind Control. It's just like the first place to start with this. It's on the shelf.
There we go. This book?
There you go.
This is not a paid promotion. I just have the book on my shelf. So, yeah.
Is that the 2000?
This is Steve Hassan here.
Yeah.
And this is the 25th edition. This is the one you want. So
2018. Yeah.
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 I don't have any books
listening
to show
that
anybody.
one.
I just, since it was here,
Yeah, that's what it looks like, and it's such a read, especially if you've been in something like that, and if you're doubting whether what you were involved in was a cult. I think for some of the smaller cults, like, you know, you're talking about what you're talking about, Chris, everyone's who isn't in it is aware of it. And they're like, we know what that is for the most part. And it's the same with like Jehovah's Witnesses as well. But the group that I was involved in, I mean, there's not very many people actually speaking out about it. There's not very many people saying that's a cult. So for me coming out of it, I was like, is this a cult? Am I just seeing a cult and wanting to see it as a cult? But when I was listening through that book, we got the audio book, I was like, no, this is a cult. Like, this is definitely a cult. And yeah, so doing that little bit of research does make a difference. But cult identity, let's talk about that. I keep avoiding that.
Just one last point on the communication part also, and then I will jump into the personality thing is over social media, over email, over tweets, forget it. Just don't even try it. It's better to not try it and screw it up as badly as you will on social media. And, you know, then try to convert somebody or deconvert somebody over Twitter, right? I mean, you'd think something like this would be kind of obvious, but it really isn't to people. And they get into these like vicious arguments and stuff. You don't want to have anything to do with any of that because you can't repair that. When you're in person with somebody, there's so many more dynamics at play, and they can relate to you a hell of a lot more easily, and they will not misinterpret your words as easily when you are right there. So I can't stress enough that for the really important talks you're going to have with anybody, you really do need to do it in person. Maybe over the phone or a video chat, but really it's not as good.
What if there's accessibility issues though? So let's say somebody,
I know.
Right. Like you'd still have to try something. I understand what you're saying, and I feel like in a public forum would be the worst conceivable way to do it, like on a Facebook.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you know what social media is good for that is to keep in communication with the person.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Not argue with them, not harp at them or try to mic drop on them, but just to maintain a communication with them. It like once somebody goes all the way in, that is a really challenging effort to stay in touch with them because their whole group is trying to convince them to not be in communication with the outside world, and is literally going out of its way to set up an us versus them setup in the person's head. So if you can continue to maintain friendly communication with the person, that itself is really an achievement worth doing.
It also shows them as well that people outside aren't as bad as they're being made out to be.
Exactly.
If you're compassionate and you're consistent with that as well,
That's right.
If you're consistent, it really makes a difference. Like, you know, like going back to Jehovah's Witnesses and my family and stuff, the arguments we've had over the years, I've remained myself. And so when we do talk about these things, the kinds of dialogues I can get in with these particular people who I'm not just going to out, but these particular people in the family are very different to the kinds of conversations you would have with the average JW car witnessing on the street or whatever, you know, because we've had that consistent dialogue where they know what they're going to get from me. And there's certain things I'm not going to let slide. There's certain things I'm not going to agree with, and I'm going to question them on it. But yeah, I think speaking to compassion, if you're just patient and you're just showing them that outside the group, there's at least one person who's decent, kind, understanding, and is able to listen. And again, not going, you're in a cult, which is a mistake I've made on my channel in the first few videos I was making. I think is just going out and go, it's a cult, which is helpful for people who aren't in it. But for the people who are in it, they're not going to want to hear that. And because it's become part of their value system, their identity. They are. So you're challenging them as much as you're challenging the group, I think, a lot of times.
Right.
That's my thinking on that.
So I have before we get off communication, we will get to the identity thing, I promise. So I'm interested in throwing this by you guys. This is one of the strategies that I utilize when I'm speaking to somebody who seems a little bit put off by me or potentially combative just because of, you know, the labels that I ascribe to and the preconceptions that they have about somebody like me. So one of the things that I do, instead of saying, you know, you believe wrong things, is I attempt to say, oh, okay, I can see how you would come to that. Like I recognize and allow them to understand that I see them as reasonable and rational, which I may or may not be a good idea in a cult scenario, but or at least that I can see where they're coming from. I can see how they got to their conclusions. Doesn't need to be reasonable or rational for me to be able to perceive how they ended up there. And I say, well, here's how I came to sort of a different perception. Like I can kind of see how you got there. Can you maybe see how I got here? Like, can you see the steps that I took to get here? And that forces them to be in an empathetic state where they have to kind of role play as me and then go through the cognitive work of actually figuring whether or not it is plausible to get where I am, which forces them to assess whether it's plausible or not in order to even answer the question, as opposed to just avoiding or, crapping on my belief system as opposed to theirs. So is that the type of, or could that be a component of a communication strategy? And when should something like that be introduced, if at all?
I think I'm interested to see what you have to say on that, Chris, but I think that with someone who is in a cult, in any kind of high control group, they're invested in their point of view being the only point of view that is right. And I know that that's true of most people anyway, but with a situation like that where it's constantly being reinforced by their environment and the people around them and the language and everything, it may be harder for them to even begin to understand how you got to your point of view, I think. Interesting. Because we're dealing with something that has hijacked their worldview. It's hijacked their entire life, What do you think, Chris?
Well, that's very true. And very, very true. Because you're dealing with somebody who's also got information you don't have. So they're thinking with things that are out of your view, and they're going to accept things, and they might tell you some things that sound absolutely batshit insanely crazy.
Yeah.
And they are. But the way they got there, they're not telling you the whole path of logic that got them there. They're only telling you this crazy thing, right? And of course, if you react to that with, what the fuck, that's not so good, right?
Yeah.
Because they got there, in their mind, they got there logically.
Right.
However they did it, or emotionally, I had an experience you just wouldn't understand, right? This is mostly how it goes. It's more of an emotional experiential event than it is a logical train of thought that got them there. But like with Scientology, it's both, because you might have an epiphany moment, or you might have a super dopamine moment, and then you go, okay, Scientology works. But then you go in a classroom and you study all this stuff, and you have to sort of logic your way through it. So it depends on the cult as to what the framework's going to be and how the person's going to have their aha moment and continue to be educated. Somebody who's meditating all day, like in TM, isn't going to be sitting there studying a lot of stuff, but they're going to tell you all about their experiences while they were meditating, right? Even to the point where they feel that they might be levitating through their meditation. It gets pretty out there at the upper levels of TM. So it's contextual to the person, but talking to them from their frame of mind or their point of view, you always want to have that out there. You always want to remember, it's not about me, it's about them.
Right, okay.
That's what gets me, at least. That's what keeps me a lot, or tuned into who I'm talking to and what I'm trying to do when I'm dealing with somebody like that.
You got to remember as well. Sorry, Shannon.
No, please, go.
You want to remember as well, like, why are you doing this? Why are you even having this conversation? What are you interested in here? Because so many times you can get caught up in the I got you kind of a moment, and it's not about that. I think so many times, at least for me, it's not about that, because it doesn't go anywhere. You might get that moment of like, I know I'm right, but you already know you're right. You're sitting there talking to someone who's in a cult, like, that they're in a cult. But so yeah, it's a tricky thing. There's something else I was going to say.
It's destructive to your future relationship to try to dunk on them.
Yeah.
That's not a good idea with a cult member. I mean, I'm just, it's not a good idea generally with most people in most situations, but with a cult member, you're talking about somebody who's adopting a whole new way of looking at the world. And when you challenge that worldview, they're gonna double down on it. It's just what they're gonna do. And so if you're trying to, because here's the thing, as far as their belief, their newfound belief system or mantras or whatever system or guru or whatever it is, they know more about it than you do as far as they're concerned. Right? Maybe with Scientology, it wouldn't be that way. You've watched South Park. You know all the dirty deals. You know all the confidential stuff. L. Ron Hubbard was a pathological liar who's married 3 times. 2 women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know all that. But he doesn't give a shit about any of that because he doesn't think any of that's true. So he doesn't want to hear it. He knows what Scientology is because he's the one who goes down and does the classes, and he's the one who goes into the auditing. You don't. So you don't know. So trying to dunk on him with, something he doesn't know is going to get you exactly nowhere.
So it's more emotional and experiential than it is rational. So you can't attempt to... So this is valuable for me because the strategy that I thought may have transitioned, I'm seeing the weaknesses in it now because they're probably not even interested in assessing the rationality of them because they don't really care. They don't really care whether it's rational or not because that's not why they're invested. Their investments more, they had an emotional or perceptual experience that was set inside a framework that's consistently reinforced to the point that they believe that those experiences are elicited because of that framework. And are seeking.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So exactly. It's not any different from arguing with Christians as atheists.
Right.
You don't reason them out of it. They might reason themselves out of it eventually if you drop enough, truth bombs on them which they can take in and understand, and you're planting seeds.
Okay.
But you don't argue somebody out of their religious beliefs or any more than you'd argue somebody out of a political belief. It just doesn't happen, because they didn't adopt those beliefs because they argued themselves into it. That's not how that worked, right? So they either grew up.
I like that.
They grew up.
Quote.
You can use that. Because they either grew up in it, in which case their critical thinking and their rationale and their choice was never consulted.
Right.
And so it's always been that way, which is the worst, the second gens. Or they got into it at some point and it solved a problem for them. If it hadn't solved that problem, they would not have joined the group.
Right.
So that's why the entry-level stuff for these cults is always the good stuff. Because that's what works. That's what gives somebody a boost.
Yeah, the love bombing and the making people feel like they're smart or they have inside information or they have access to a level of truth that other people don't have access to because of their affiliations with you and your people. So this may be a good transition to get into the group identity stuff that Andey wanted to talk about that I think is really fascinating. Where do you think that plays into getting through to somebody or understanding where they're at, which is, I think, understanding where somebody's at is one of the most important things you can do if you're attempting to get through to them. If you don't know where they're at, whatever you try is probably going to fail. And if you do succeed, it'll probably be by accident.
That's happened. That has happened.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you think, Andey?
Yeah, so I think the first place to go with this particular point is definitely back to combating cult mind control. But there was a point that I wanted to add to the previous thing we were just saying, which we may end up going around again. Which is that this was kind of the case for me, and I know that it's the case in other groups as well. When you're involved in a group and you're listening to what sounds like logic from the leader or from wherever you're getting the teachings from within the group, it will convince you. And what you'll do is you'll take the thing that's convinced you and then you'll go and say that to someone else and they won't get it. But that's because they're not following the line that you followed to get there. But you're not able to repeat that necessarily. So you hear that in when you're talking to JWs and they're talking about the end times and the 19, like if you bring up 1914 and overlapping generations and all that kind of stuff, they're probably not going to be able to explain it to you. And when I've had these conversations, I said to them, like, you know, can you explain that to me? And they're like, well, we don't want to get into all that. And I'm thinking, is it that you don't want to get into it, or that you can't get into it? And I think that because you're in that environment and the information's just layering on top of, like, when I've started talking to these people in my family, they've been in it 40 years. So they've got layers upon layers upon layers of this programming that you're trying to get through to them through. And in my case, I was in the group for 3 years, so it's not quite as heavy as that, but say 3 years, 2-3 years, something like that. And yeah, so I've heard the leader say something, and it's convinced me, and the logic makes sense to me when I'm watching that video or listening to these people talk about it. But then when I go and try and repeat that, it's not going to come out the same, and it's not going to make sense in the same way. And it becomes a little bit of a guess what I'm thinking kind of a situation. And I saw that in a recent video I did on my channel where I was reacting to my old self. It doesn't make any sense what I was saying. It's incoherent almost. But I seem to think I was onto something. I seem to think it made sense, right? And I think that's such a. I imagine you seeing the same thing, Chris. Yeah. Well, yeah. There you go. It's
some of the shit I used to. You would not believe some of the shit I used to say, man. And I believed it. Yeah. Okay.
And you're very.
But you look on it now, and you look back on it now, and you're like, okay, right. What? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and that does feed into the cult identity, because and Hassan talks about this in his book. And again, please, if you want to learn about this stuff, that book is the first place I would send anybody. It's just like 101 really on this stuff. But yeah, what you're dealing with this is someone who is either susceptible or targeted by a group ends up by slow and gradual process implanted with a new kind of self, if that makes sense. And that self slowly but surely takes over to the point where that's basically running the show, and who they were before is still there, and it will come out at times, and you'll see that when you're in conversation, sometimes mid-conversation, they'll say something and it's just like who they used to be. And then it will flip back, and you're now talking to the new version of them again. And the new version, you'll know it because it will sound like a group, all the group ideologies there. Their old values won't be there necessarily all the time, you know. And the language is, as I mentioned earlier, the language that they use is going to be, you know, in the group I was involved in, it's all the new agey language. It's vibrational frequency, and it's alignment and attraction and all of that kind of stuff. All of those words that they mean something to other people, but they don't mean what you think in the group. And when you're talking to someone who has this identity that's been that's taken over in that kind of way, I think, and Hassan has recommended this as well, the best thing to do is try to speak to the old them in a way, rather than trying to like philosophize them out of it or use rationality to get them out of it. Rationalize them out of it. Is that how that sentence should have gone?
It can be used as a verb that way, yeah.
Yeah. To try and get them out of it in that way it can be futile. Like the amount of conversations I've had with these JW family members, and I keep going back to that because it's like the most comprehensive example I've got. Is I sometimes go, right, I'm going to tackle it this way this time, and I'll try and go in, right, how do you know it's true? And they're like, well, you know, the Bible prophecies, blah blah blah, and I don't, like Chris was saying, they know more about that than me, so I can't win with that. But what I can do is I can connect to who they were before, and I can highlight. I can ask them, and I do ask them about what their life was like before, and the kind of things they enjoyed before, because it reconnects. With them and who they were.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's very good because it keeps those old memory pathways alive.
Forces them to remember the different version of themselves and also acknowledge that it was a different version of themselves.
That's right. That there was an earlier time, especially when you're directing them to memories of earlier times of happiness.
Right.
You know, wins, achievements, goals set and met, you know, or times of just pure joy and play and happiness, right? Which people,
And connection.
You know, yeah, exactly.
Do you feel less connected when you're, I don't understand the dynamic as well as I should, which is what, like, this is a wonderful conversation. Like, you guys are blowing my mind in a lot of ways, and I'm going to have to think about a lot of stuff afterwards. So I love this, and thank you, both of you. I lost my train of thought because I'm so excited. So what was I going to say? Oh my gosh, this is awful. Oh, here's what I was going to say about connectedness. Like, do you feel, I've often said, and I've been in a mentally abusive relationship. And I've often said the worst feeling in my life is being alone in the room with somebody else. Like feeling isolated in myself, like feeling trapped inside myself and alone in a room with somebody else. Is it like that, Nicole? Do you feel isolated? Do you feel like the older version of yourself is kind of pushed back, isolated, or do you feel really, really, really connected? Like, is it the opposite way? I would think it's kind of like the opposite way, like heightened sense of connection. Maybe.
Oh yeah, no, it's like when you fall in love. At the beginning, it's just like falling in love. Okay. I mean, all the same parts of the brain are lighting up and all the same hormones are flying through your body. It's a tremendous experience when you first get involved with these groups.
Right.
And it is very similar to that because the dynamics are the same as an abusive one-on-one relationship. Right. You know, ultimately it's an abusive relationship. So there's a lot of similarities that we can draw on for this and help people understand it that way. And it's not falling in love, but I'm saying it's like that. You know, it lights up a lot of the same parts of the brain.
Sort of euphoria, endorphin induced.
Oh yeah,
like
all
excitement
that.
And
you know, and the excitement of finding answers you've been looking for, or solving problems you thought were unsolvable, or getting acceptance from a group of people unconditionally. Because at first, that's what it always looks like. It always looks like unconditional acceptance, and then the conditions slowly start.
Yeah, that turns.
Yeah, it does turn, and that's one of the reasons we call them destructive cults, is because they if they didn't do that, we wouldn't have a problem with them.
Yeah.
You know, so.
They just need people you talk to about silly stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know?
As opposed to people who are attempting to control your behavior. That's something
right.
else I get concerned about, because if somebody is, I'm going to go back to an emotionally abusive relationship again. It doesn't have to be a partner relationship. Like, you can be in emotionally abusive relationships with parents, with friends.
Yep.
You start to really want to please that person because you've become averse to their negative reactions and the consequences of their negative reactions. So you start to make more and more silly decisions and more concessions about, how you treat yourself and how you think others should treat you, in order to avoid the anxiety and stress that comes with not fulfilling their expectations, disappointing them, or eliciting negative, punishing responses from them. And you get into a sort of a shame spiral where you don't even want to admit that that's the case, because then you would have to admit that you're allowing somebody to have some semblance of control, or that they're affecting you more than you feel like they should, those sorts of things. If you're in a cult environment, is that something that happens? Like, is it fully analogous, like sort of one-to-one, or is it more so that you don't feel that? Is it more seeking love or avoiding the consequences?
Well, here's the thing: it's both. And I wanted to make it clear right away, because it's the same, and actually in the relationship, it's kind of the same, right? Like, it's not just bad, right? It's not like, oh my God, this was really good, and then bad, and you stay, right? That's not. It's really good, and then it starts getting a little weird, but it's still good, and then, well, no, hold on, no, this is bad. This is definitely bad. And I don't like this at all. Oh, wait a minute. It got good again.
Yeah.
Oh, I can stay with this for a while. Oh, wait, bad. no, it got good again, right? And then so it's looking for the good as well as experiencing the bad. It's the expectation and that there's going to be some good at the other side of all this bad. And it's all predicated on the original, the original euphoria, because you're always trying to get that back.
Right.
You want to hit that peak again, and it doesn't quite ever seem to totally get, maybe sometimes, there was that one time, but then it's back down again. That's kind of more how I've seen it play out in every experience I've seen.
I've also heard, and in particular to one-to-one relationships, although, like you say, one-to-one relationships and cults are so similar and they can fit the bite model. It's really just rolled out to a larger audience. But the idea of like a fruit machine, a slots machine, intermittent, intermittent. I can't remember what the words are, but yeah, it's like that. Like you're playing and playing just to get the good bits.
That's exactly right.
The gambling addiction.
That's right. And actually the brain chemistry is exactly the same.
Okay.
And the optimum percentage, I actually learned this from Robert Sapolsky, who from his course on human behavioral biology that's online.
Right.
He gave this whole course at Stanford, and this was a point he went over. The actual percentage mark is 50%.
Interesting.
That's where you want it to ideally be, right? You're going to win as many times as you're going to lose. Now, it might not always be a boom, 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 boom. It might be there's a string of this sucks, and then you're going to have a, but it'll even out.
And you have a sense of inevitability that way. So you're going to have a reward. No matter how much you lose, you're going to get that hit. You're going to get
exactly. And it's the expectation of the reward. It's not the gaining of the reward is not what causes the dopamine rush. This has not been totally clear for some people. It is the expectation, the anticipation, the looking forward to. That's what actually gets the dopamine going, and that's what excites your pleasure centers. That's just kind of how that works.
Well, that makes a lot of logical sense, because otherwise you would pursue the behavior once and lose and be averse to it because you didn't get anything out of that activity. Why would you repeat that activity? But anticipation is one of the best parts of joy. Having that excitement about what's going to happen is better in some cases. And you can almost always have that.
Because we're always imagining all these wonderful things. And we're let down often by the reality when it comes. It's always a little bit of I kind of imagined it to be, and there's always a little something, you know what I mean? And I don't mean to poop on everybody's parade. I just mean that that anticipation thing is a powerful motivator. It's a powerful motivator.
So you think that in cult-like scenarios, they pepper enough rewards that it's not even necessarily about constant aversion. Like they can be relatively consistently abusive and enact a lot of behavioral control over you. But because you're anticipating that reward, that group love, that I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Ritual where you're going to have that feeling with a group of people or feel connected with yourself or get that introspective moment. You're seeking that out. So how
that's exactly right.
Do you bring up, since we're talking about breaking through to people, since that's what they're seeking, since it's essentially sort of it's a behavioral group affiliation addiction kind of, then
in a lot of senses, yeah,
like it's a social and sort of spiritual ideological addiction.
Yeah, I mean, the labels will be context specific for the group.
Right. So do you bring up that sort of abusive behavior then when you're addressing the person? Because if you bring up gambling, like for a gambler, if you say, well, gambling means you lose money, they're immediately going to flip to, sometimes I win. And the sometimes I win is their motivation because of that anticipation. How do you usurp that? Because they don't really care about the lost money, or in this instance, the behavioral modification, personality changes, and abusive isolation that they're getting from their real lives. They just want that reward. What do you do?
Well, I mean, eventually you're going to have to, I don't have what's the word? A schedule of treatment, for the person. But, but you're talking about addiction therapy there. It's slightly different, I think, with people who are in cults, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that a person who is involved in a destructive cult is addicted to the cult. I think that would frame it in an improper way, even though I'm sure you'll share some of the same biology.
Mm-hmm. You lose some nuance there, don't you? If you start using the same terms.
I don't mean
like
to
when
be
people
super
say
reductive.
all religions are cults. No,
So I'm sorry if it seems that way. I like to frame things in psychological circumstances that I know so that I can better build around them. So I'm sorry if it seems super reductive. I completely apologize. I'm just trying to throw to understand in context that I already understand a little better.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's more like I said, it's kind of more like falling in love. It's like a relationship. Being in a cult often is focused around an individual, right? Or a subject matter, an idol or something, right? Or some thing that represents the symbology or iconography or whatever of the group. But usually it's a person. L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology, right? You have God in the Christian cults, but there's always somebody in this world who is interpreting God's word, right? Mm-hmm. And that person is the cult leader, right? So there's a relationship there of one kind or another, even if it's just sort of an imagined relationship because the person's not really there. I never met L. Ron Hubbard in person. And it was years and years before I met David Miscavige, but he was represented by his books and his lectures and his buildings and all of that. And there were busts and statues of him everywhere, exactly for that purpose. So I would feel connected with this man no matter where I went in the building. That was definitely on purpose, It's not just repetition of message, it's connectivity. So you are in this relationship with this other person. And that's where I talk about the abusive aspect of it, because it becomes an abusive relationship eventually. But at first, it's the most wonderful thing you've ever experienced, and that gives a lot of staying power to it, a lot.
Especially if you don't have a previous self, like you said, if you're a second gen, because then you don't even have a previous self to appeal to.
No,
because every
being
version of yourself that you would recognize through memory already has that indoctrination embedded within that part of their story, that part of their history.
Yeah, so you have to encourage them, don't you, to develop likes, dislikes, their own preferences, their own opinions, that's a really important thing with this, and that's why, not only just because I'm not an expert, but it's
You're
very
insightful though. Stop not giving yourself.
It's like when you say you're trash.
I do. I am. Objectively true.
You say that?
I do all the time. No, keep going. Those are all really valid points, Andy. I didn't mean to derail because those are.
But yeah, no, it's like, when I say in my videos, please look this up, research it for yourself. It's as much because I'm not an expert and it's important that I'm showing my sources, as it's important for people who are possibly involved with an unsafe group, or they suspect they are, or they know someone who is, to sort of work through this themselves and think for themselves, because that part of the brain or whatever it is, I don't really know too much about the brain, but those capacities in a person's life are shut down. They're being thought for a lot of times. So when you are starting to help them out, or when you're yourself coming out, you've got to build that muscle up again. Really, you've got to start to think for yourself, reason things out, have your own thoughts, have your own opinions, dig down on some ideas. Also, something you were saying, Chris, about having the busts and having the strange relationship they're there but they're not there. In a group I was involved in, because there's this whole mystical new agey sort of aspect, there was the thought that the leader actually said a number of times that when people dream of her, she's actually there in the dream. So you're having dreams of the person and you're communicating with them in that dream, apparently. And I had a number of dreams of the leader and believed that they meant something, Strangely, all my dreams of the leader were that she was in a kind of a victim state and I had to save her, which says more about me perhaps, but there's also some interesting things about the relationship with the leader and the group members, that she does position herself both as the be all and end all and someone that everyone needs to protect. So when you speak out about the group and the leader, they're all straight on it and they're well rehearsed, protecting the leader. So yeah.
That is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, because you have absolutely no control over what happens in your dream. So if she convinces you that what she's saying to you in a dream that you're having about her is her actually talking to you, and she says harmful or detrimental things, wow.
If you're unwell, mentally unwell, and you're having a dream like that, and it's very. We won't get into the specifics of this group and stuff, but there's a lot of really irresponsible things that are done by the specific leader, who I'm not going to name, but and those around her as well. That's cult 101. You know, because they've all got their levels of ridiculousness and stuff, and it's shocking the day you realize that, you know, you're looking at your cult, and then you're looking at this other cult, and then you're looking at your cult, and you're really, really, really looking at your cult, and then you look at this other one, and then you look at this other one, and this other one. You go, hey, wait a second. Wait a second. These are all the same, you know. These guys are doing the same stuff. They just call it different things, you know.
Yeah.
And you think that you're the only one when you're in it, and the leader's like the only one who's got it, and then you come out and you're like, so everyone can't have it. Someone's got it. Someone hasn't got it, and it just looks the same. Yeah, it's baffling. What you were saying there, though, about looking at other cults, that's such an important part of it as well, is studying up on other groups, because you can talk. I've actually had more of an open conversation with these JW family members about cults since I started talking about the group I was involved in, and just talking about the similar things about my group and their group. Because without saying anything, you don't say, oh, look, that's the same. They'll know it's the same. They'll recognize it's the same. But you're not talking about that at all. You're just talking about what you were involved in. It's that you get some really interesting conversations that way, because they'll disagree with it when you're talking about that group. But the moment you talk about their group, it's, oh, well, no, it's not the same. It's different. You know? So you just avoid talking about their group.
So you're kind of chipping away at causing some dissonance in them.
Yeah,
that's right.
With avoiding the
really
recognition
gently. Just really gently, and Hassan talks non-threatening. That's the key word, non-threatening. You don't want them to feel like they're So I said earlier, the second their hackles are up, it's over.
So you're just constantly dropping grains of sand on the scale to try to tip it, one at a time.
That's right. Which is why it's so important you be able to maintain a communication with them, despite the fact that they're in this group that is kind of wanting them to not be in communication with you. That's why just maintaining that is what allows you to even be able to do any of this. Right. If you cut it off by, you know, brah, or trying to mic drop on them or something, then
Why
it's over.
Why are you so dumb? Everybody can see.
Everybody can see it's a cult. Why can't you? What's your problem?
Why are you running away?
Why are you so stupid? You're so stupid now. You didn't used to talk like this. God. You know?
That doesn't work. That's weird. That's the first thing I would have tried.
I have been there. No, it doesn't work.
So we're approaching the end. I did see one super chat come through, so I will read that shortly. But before we do that, I want to make sure, Chris, you mentioned before we went on that education is really important. And I want to make sure that you feel as though we had an opportunity to touch on all of it. And if not, I'd like to make sure you have the opportunity to talk on it now.
No problem. Just at the end here, since we started talking about, we got into the end curve of people leaving and recovering from. And all I want to say on that is education is crucial. At least for me, it has been. And I will happily project this on the rest of the world. Because education's just, I've always been an education hound. So learning, reading, studying about your cult, about cult mechanisms in general, about thought reform, how all this stuff works, even reading about propaganda and how PR works and stuff is helpful for this, because all of this stuff it's all in the toolbox of what the cult leader uses to build his cult. And when you can see all of that, it is cathartic as hell. Like I said, the moment that you realize your cult ain't so special anymore, and your cult leader is just doing the same shit all these other guys were doing, and he just has different names for what he's doing, for what he's doing. So I can't say enough about the value of education in the recovery process.
Perfect. Andey, did you have anything else you wanted to add before?
I don't know. I just I would second that. It's brilliantly put, Chris. Exactly. Just learn, because if you don't, okay. So this is what I always say. I have got something to add. This is it.
Good.
What I always say is, if you don't know how cults work, how can you know if you're in one? If you don't understand how undue influence works, how can you know if you're under it? So whether or not you think you are or not, whether or not you think your group's dangerous or is a cult, whatever, just doing that bit of research, it will help you. Perhaps it will help you to, I think Lloyd Evans put the win-win forward on his channel, similar to this. It's, if you do that research and it turns out it's not a cult, great. And now you've got answers for when people accuse it of being a cult.
Right.
But if you do that research and you find out it is a cult, now you know. And now you can start the process of leaving. So, and it's the same with other people who, whether you're not in a cult or you know people who are in groups. If you don't know how it works, then how can you protect against it? So just having that knowledge, even if I'm not planning to get into a cult. No one is, by the way. Just kind of, do that research, because you never know. It may come in handy, and I'm sure it will, especially in today's day and age where undue influence is pretty much everywhere,
Well, I'll second that, because I'll tell you, all this learning I've been doing over the last 7 years has opened my eyes to all kinds of stuff going on in the world. When you're talking about, and I'm not talking about stupid conspiracy bullshit. I just mean opening your eyes to seeing how social media, how propaganda, how advertisements, how all of this stuff actually does affect how we think. Nobody's, there's nobody who's immune to this stuff. And the people who think they are the first to fall. So learning about this stuff is really helpful for everybody.
Yeah, it's a good idea to learn about how you're influenced in general, I think. And for anybody, exactly. Who wants to make sure that they decrease their susceptibility. There's no way to go down to a zero susceptibility. And if you think to yourself, well, I'm not one of those people and nobody would ever be able to influence me. I think that if you took a real strong, hard look at a lot of the ideologies you have, you'd realize that there's some of them, most of them, kind of a lot of them, that you were influenced into leaning towards, at the very least, if not fully indoctrinated into defending.
That's right.
So it's a good thing to look at. And I'm not immune either. I do all kinds of foolish stuff, and I'm sure it's everybody else's fault for indoctrinating me.
Of course. Of
course it is. It's going to be your fault. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, hello.
Let's be real. All right. I have one super chat, and I don't know if this is an insult or a compliment. It says, Shannon is as intelligent as she is beautiful. That
is definitely a compliment.
Thank you.
Yes, that's definitely a compliment.
Thank you, because that could go either way.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely going.
I appreciate it, Alan. Yeah. Thanks. All right. So before we go, I want to say thank you to both of you for giving me an hour of your time. This was insanely valuable to me, and I hope it was as valuable to other people who are listening. And I want you to have an opportunity for anybody who came in late to tell everyone where to find you. So I'll start with you, Andey. Let everybody know who you are, where to find you.
Yeah, okay. I mentioned at the beginning, obviously, if anyone's joined us since, I used to be in a New Age group, online group, cult, and I am now an atheist, agnostic atheist, making videos on YouTube. I make videos about destructive cults, damaging norms, and bad ideas. You can find me, you just type in Andey Fellows, just put an E before the Y and an E before the S, Shannon.
I did it!
And you can find me there. You'll probably find a number of other things on me as well that I used to do. There's all sorts of stuff. I grew up with the internet, so there's all sorts of things of me on the internet that I can't take down. But yeah, Andey the Fellows, just type that in and you'll find it. But Shannon's put the link below anyway, haven't you?
Yeah, it's in the description box.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Cool. Chris
Thanks
Shelton.
for
You can
having
find
me as
me at
well.
my YouTube channel, Chris Shelton, Critical Thinker at Large. You can find my book on Amazon. It is called Scientology A to Xenu. Yeah, and that's my critical analysis of the topic. That's who I am. I'm a person who talks about Scientology, destructive cults, and critical thinking, and trying to do my part to make the world a better place.
All right. So yeah, like I said, both of their links are in the description box, and their Twitter handles and their YouTube addresses are in the appropriate spots on the overlay. And we'll pretend they always were, and that I spelled everybody's name correctly. And I did a fantastic job start to finish, like I always do.
Yay, Shannon!
That's what we'll pretend happened. So thank you, everybody in the chat. I'm always glad to see you here, even though I'm the worst at engaging with the chat, and for that I apologize. But I love you, and thank you for coming out, and I always read the chat afterwards. Please leave a comment down below to let me know what you think, and reach out regarding, how any ideas that you may have that you think could contribute to a conversation like this, so that other people who are stumbling upon this stream may have the opportunity to see what you have to contribute as well. And be good to each other. Some of you probably won't be, but those of you who can, try. Do what you can. And as always, everybody, help elevate the discourse. Bye.